every single person, we believe, fits into one of these 5 different stages of faith. The first stage would be pre-faith. That's someone who has not yet made a decision for Christ. And this could be someone who's totally antagonistic. They feel like they're enemies of God. Or it could be someone who's just not sure. They might describe themselves as agnostic. They're a little bit more, I'm not sure what to believe about God. They could even be someone who's seeking and interested in Jesus, interested in the church, but they just haven't come to the point where they've received the gospel. So the key need for someone, if you are in the pre-faith stage, is you need the seed of the word of God, as Jesus talks about in Matthew chapter 13. You need the gospel sown into your life. You need encounters with the gospel. And so you need to be going to church hearing the gospel. You need to be reading the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, reading the gospels from the New Testament, and even having conversations with believers to just ask questions and find out what you believe. The next stage, though, and this is the person who has started delighting in the law of the Lord, is someone who responds to the gospel and they're new to faith. So that's stage 2, is someone who's new to the faith. There's someone who, and they're excited that maybe they just got baptized, right? And they're excited about their faith, but they're not really that mature yet. Instead of a full-blown plant, it's just a little sprout. Their faith is just a little tiny sprout. And so the key need there is it needs support, right? Think about when anything is young, is it needs support. And so we try and get people who have just recently become followers of Jesus to really get into life groups. To have more mature believers around them that they can ask questions to, that people who can pray for them, because life isn't easy. After you come up from the baptismal waters, life doesn't just get instantly easy. In fact, oftentimes that's exactly when the enemy begins to attack. And so you need support, you need structure, you need some education to start learning what the Bible actually says, some of those core spiritual practices. Stage 3 of discipleship on the path as we continue down that journey is actually someone who is young in the faith. Now, we use the word young. You don't have to be young in years. You don't have to be a young person to be young in the faith. You could be someone who's just, you're 12 years old, and so you haven't had that many years of following Jesus, so you might be young in the faith. But you could be 70 years old, right? And so you might be young in the faith, even if you've gone to church for decades, because time in a church service, time logged, Sundays logged in, whatever attendance sheet you're using, doesn't always equate to spiritual maturity. And so someone who's young in the faith, they may not be a brand new Christian, but they might be someone who there's been barriers preventing them from growth. There's rocks in the soil that's preventing the roots from going deeper, or there's weeds in that person's life that's kind of choked out spiritual growth over time. And so for someone who's young in the faith, oftentimes what you'll see is a little bit of a consumer mentality when it comes to Christianity. It's a little bit of a what's in it for me, and how can you feed me, and how can you grow me? But there hasn't been this turning the corner of starting to serve, starting to pour out, and starting to love people like Christ loves the church. And so your key need, if you're young in the faith, is to begin to pour out, to begin to serve, and to begin to live that humble, consider the needs of others before yourself, as Paul talks about in Philippians 2, kind of life. That's your key need if you're young in the faith. The next stage, though, as you continue down that path of growth, is actually the stage of a growing faith. That's someone who they've pushed past being young in the faith, and now they're growing. This is someone who's probably serving already. They're probably giving towards ministry already. But maybe it's just the first steps. They signed up for a way to serve. They signed up to give. Maybe they even are part of a small group. They know some key spiritual practices. They have a good devotional time, some of that sort of stuff. But their key need is actually to continue down the path of growth, is to step up the ways that they're using their gifts for God's kingdom. And so what that might look like is what I call faith-stretching opportunities. That it's possible to even be serving and giving and living your life selflessly, but you still have those boundaries where you only give to a certain point. You only serve in ways that you feel comfortable. And so for someone who's growing in the faith, they might have a plant that looks pretty healthy in their life, but in fact what they actually need is they need to be stretched. They need to get a little disrupted and uncomfortable, and for someone to call them to something more. And so if you are in the growing faith, what I would say you need is you need to step up your game. Maybe you're serving at this level. Maybe you need to take on some leadership. You're attending a life group. Maybe it's time to become an apprentice and learn how to lead a life group. Maybe it's time for you to get real about sharing your faith. Maybe you've handed out some invite cards to invite people to services. That's great, but maybe what you need to start doing is start sharing your testimony with others and getting into spiritual conversations. Maybe you pray for someone personally. Maybe you need to go up to that person and say, hey, can I pray for you right now? Those are faith-stretching opportunities where you don't have this, I'll only follow Jesus up to this point. You kind of break that barrier, you get uncomfortable, and that's the growth zone. That's where growth truly happens. And that leads us to the fifth stage of discipleship on this pathway is what we call mature faith. Someone who has grown up in the faith. There's no boundaries. They'll do whatever God calls them to for the sake of his kingdom. They've got a healthy, flourishing plant. But unlike this plant, I don't even think this plant can grow fruit. There's actually fruit in that person's life. You see the difference. You can tell this person is mature. They've got the fruit on the Spirit, inside their character. They're living out their calling, their purpose. They're using their gifts for God's kingdom. But the key thing for someone who is mature in the faith is they're reproducing. Because the fruit has seeds, and the fruit falls off, and the seeds go into the ground, and all of a sudden, the person who's mature in the faith is pouring into others. That by definition, someone who you're not mature in the faith until you are discipling someone else. And so what that might mean is it might mean you are sharing your faith, you're sowing seeds of the gospel, and you're bringing people to Christ. It might also mean you are discipling someone through a small group, through a mentorship, through whatever, one-on-one, and you're just helping someone who's younger in the faith bring them along that discipleship pathway. Or it could even look like you're discipling your kids really well, right? And you're raising them up in the wisdom and instruction of the Lord. And so I would say for you, if you are mature in the faith, you're already doing that. Here's your key need, though. I want to challenge you to take it one step further. If you are mature in the faith, you're already discipling people. I would challenge you to, once you get someone to the point where they are growing in their faith, to actually turn them loose. And now you're not a spiritual parent, you're a spiritual grandparent. And someone who you have discipled is now discipling someone else. That's the discipleship pathway. And here at Hill City Church, we want to become and make disciples who walk with God, connect with people, and impact the world. And what that tangibly looks like is it means going down this discipleship pathway, going from one stage to the next.